This was when I first had the experience of living alone, or with a person I didn't know exactly. Well, I was moving out of my city for a new job, and I was looking at all these websites and apartments online, and I found an apartment that got me interested. My roommate was a weird dude named Brian. He was kind of tall, skinny, and just had the weirdest facial expressions on his face 24/7, literally all the time. I had never seen anything like this. He was also about the same age as me at the time. The apartment was a little old, but it was all good to me. I just wanted a chill place to stay for a bit, hopefully with someone cool and chill too. My first night in the apartment, I noticed Brian had some odd habits. He would pace around the living room at odd hours, muttering to himself. At first, I thought he might just be stressed or something, so I didn't pay it much mind. But as the days went on, his behavior only got stranger. One evening, I came home from work to find Brian sitting in the dark, staring at a blank TV screen. When I turned on the light, he didn't even flinch. He just slowly turned his head towards me, with a creepy grin spreading across his whole face. "Had a good day?" he asked. His voice was really low, almost a whisper. I nodded and quickly went to my room, trying to shake off the unsettling-ass feeling. The next few nights were similar. I would hear him talking to himself, laughing softly at nothing. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching. I thought it was coming from outside, but then I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. I slowly got up and opened my bedroom door just a crack. There was Brian, crouched in the hallway, scratching the wall with his fingernails. "Brian, what are you doing?" I asked with my voice trembling. He looked up at me with his eyes wide. "Just making sure they can't get in," he said cryptically. I didn't know what the hell to say, so I just closed my door and went back to bed with my heart pounding. The next morning, I decided to talk to him about it. "Brian, are you okay? You've been acting really strange lately." He just looked at me with that same eerie smile. "I'm fine. Just a little tired, I guess." I wasn't convinced, but I let it go. That night, I decided to stay up and see what he was up to. Around midnight, I heard him moving around again. I peeked out of my room and saw him standing in the living room, holding a goddamn knife. My heart stopped, man. What was he planning to do? I watched as he walked to the front door and started carving strange symbols into it. I had no idea what they meant, but it scared the shit out of me. I slowly backed into my room and locked the door, hoping he wouldn't come after me. The next morning, I called my best friend and told him everything. "You need to get out of there," he said. "That guy sounds dangerous." I knew he was right, but I didn't have anywhere else to go yet. So I decided to give it a few more days and see if things would improve. But they didn't. In fact, they got worse. One night, I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. I sat up in bed with my heart racing. Brian was just standing there in the doorway, staring at me with that creepy-ass grin. "I need your help," he said. "With what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're coming for me. I need you to help me stop them." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I nodded, hoping it would get him to leave. He backed out of the room, still watching me, and closed the door. I barely slept that night, too scared to close my eyes. The next day, I called in sick to work and started looking for a new place to stay. I couldn't live with Brian anymore. That night, I packed my bags and prepared to leave. But as I was getting ready to go, I heard a loud crash from the living room. I rushed out to see what had happened. Brian was standing in the middle of the room, holding a broken mirror. "They're here," he said, and his voice was filled with fear. "Who's here?" I asked, backing away. "Them," he said, pointing to the symbols he had carved into the door. "They've found me." I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my bags and ran for the door. Brian didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching me with that same eerie grin. I didn't look back. I found a new place to stay and blocked Brian's number. I never saw him again, but sometimes I still think about those strange symbols and the fear in his eyes. I don't know what he was running from, but I'm glad I got out when I did. Years later, I came across an article about a series of bizarre incidents in that apartment building. People reported seeing strange symbols and hearing voices. Some even claimed to have seen a tall, skinny man with a really creepy grin. I couldn't help but wonder if Brian was still there, still trying to stop whatever it was that haunted him. I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. I'll never forget the time I spent living with Brian. I still remember my first college roommate to this day. He was really socially awkward and definitely out of his mind sometimes. I remember he often mumbled to himself like a goddamn creep, ate my food, and was always asking me how to pick up girls and weird stuff like that. This man was a whole red flag. But the real deal for me was when he had a mental breakdown. It was a rainy Friday night when things took a turn for the worse. I had just come back from a late-night study session at the library, drenched and exhausted. The moment I stepped into our shared dorm room, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. The room was dark, except for the dim light coming from my roommate's desk lamp. He was hunched over it, scribbling furiously in a notebook, muttering words that I just couldn't understand. I shrugged it off, thinking he was just being his usual weird self. I threw my bag on my bed and went to change out of my wet clothes. As I was drying my hair with a towel, I noticed he had stopped muttering. The silence was unnerving. I turned around to see him staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "Hey, you good?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up slowly, clutching the notebook to his chest. His movements were jerky, almost robotic. I took a step back, unsure of what he might do next. Suddenly, he started laughing. It was a low, laughing sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You don't understand," he whispered between fits of laughter. "They're coming for me. They're coming for us." I tried to calm him down, but he was beyond reasoning. He started pacing the room, tearing pages out of his notebook and throwing them around. His eyes darted around the room as if he was seeing things that weren't there. I knew I had to do something before he hurt himself or me. I grabbed my phone and dialed campus security, trying to explain the situation as calmly as I could. They assured me they would send someone over immediately. As I hung up, my roommate lunged at me, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "You called them, didn't you?" he hissed. "You called them to take me away." I managed to break free and put some distance between us. "It's for your own good," I said, trying to sound convincing. He shook his head violently. "You don't get it. They'll lock me up. They'll silence me." His eyes were wild with fear. Just then, there was a loud knock on the door. "Campus security," a voice called out. My roommate's face twisted in anger and panic. He grabbed the nearest object, a heavy textbook, and threw it at the door. "Stay away!" he screamed. The door burst open, and 2 security officers rushed in. They quickly subdued him, but he fought with an almost inhuman strength, screaming and thrashing. It took both officers to finally restrain him and drag him out of the room. I stood there, shaken and stunned, as the officers led him away. The room was a mess, papers scattered everywhere, the remains of his breakdown. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that the immediate danger was over, and guilt for not seeing the signs sooner. For the next few days, the dorm was eerily quiet. I learned from the RA that my roommate had been taken to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. They said he would be getting the help he needed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him somehow. One night, as I was trying to sleep, I heard a faint tapping at the window. My heart raced as I got up to check, but there was nothing there. Just the wind, I told myself, trying to ignore the lingering unease. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on, focusing on my studies and avoiding any mention of my former roommate. But the memory of that night stayed with me. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, I answered it. It was a nurse from the psychiatric facility. She told me that my roommate had been diagnosed with a severe form of schizophrenia. They were starting him on medication, and he was showing signs of improvement. I felt a strange sense of closure. At least now he was getting the help he needed, that's great. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The nurse had mentioned that he often talked about me, saying I was the only one who tried to understand him. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was from my former roommate. The letter was filled with ramblings and cryptic messages, but one line stood out. "They're still watching me. Be careful." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. Was this another symptom of his illness? Or was there something more to his claims? I tried to brush it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. From that day on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper seemed to be about me. I knew it was probably just my mind playing tricks, but the paranoia was relentless. Months went by, and I slowly started to regain a sense of normalcy. I made new friends, threw myself into my studies, and tried to forget about that terrifying night. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of someone who looked like my old roommate, or hear a laugh that sounded just like his, and the fear would come rushing back. There was even one night that as I was walking back to my dorm, I literally saw a figure standing in the shadows. My heart pounded as I approached, but when I got closer, there was no one there. I told myself it was just my imagination, or at least I hoped it was. Now, years later, I'm almost completely okay with it, but sometimes I catch myself thinking about this. I never saw anyone as crazy as this man before, and I really think I low-key never will see something like this again. Makes you think that you really need to be always prepared for the worst. It literally doesn't matter what type of place you are. Let me give a little bit of context. There was this time I had two roommates. One was new and was called Brittany. She was 19 years old. And the other one I had been rooming with for a while, Amy, who was 21. There was one night that I went to a party with my boyfriend, and then we spent the night at his place and came back the next day. Brittany asked me if I'd seen her gold necklace, so I just said nope. And later that night, she totally loses it and begins to slam her closet and her doors. Then she used the lock, which she never did, and she walked outside the room to talk to us. She stood there, and her face was pale and her eyes wide, looking like she had seen a freaking ghost. "Someone's been in my room," she said in a shaky voice. "Things are out of place, and my necklace is still missing." Amy and I exchanged glances. "Are you sure?" Amy asked cautiously. "Maybe you just misplaced it." "No," Brittany insisted. "I always keep it in the same spot. And now I hear whispers at night, coming from the closet. That got my attention." "Whispers? Are you sure it's not just your imagination?" Brittany shook her head vigorously. "It's real. I can feel someone watching me." We decided to check her room, and as we walked in, the air felt colder, and an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. We searched everywhere but found nothing unusual, just an eerie silence that gave us chills. Brittany looked even more distressed now. "I know it sounds crazy, but I think something's in the closet," she said to us. We approached the closet cautiously, and Amy, being the bravest, opened the door swiftly. But nothing, just clothes and shoes. We sighed in relief. "See, nothing to worry about," Amy said, trying to reassure Brittany. But the look on Brittany's face told me she wasn't convinced at all. That night, I laid in bed, thinking about what Brittany had said. Whispers from the closet. Like what? It seemed absurd, yet I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. I kept my door slightly opened, just in case. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint noise. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again. A soft, unintelligible whisper. I sat up, straining to hear. It was coming from Brittany's room. My heart pounded as I crept slowly towards her door. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I hesitated, then slowly turned the doorknob and peeked inside. Brittany was sitting on her bed, staring at the closet, tears streaming down her face. "Do you hear it?" she whispered when she saw me. "It's getting louder." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "What is it saying?" "I don't know," she replied with her voice trembling. "But it's calling to me." Suddenly, the closet door creaked open slightly, and the whispering stopped. We both just stared, frozen in fear. Then, without warning, a gust of cold air swept through the room, and the closet door slammed shut with a bang. Brittany screamed, and I rushed to her side. "We need to get out of here," I said, pulling her to her feet. We ran to Amy's room and pounded on the door until she opened it, groggy and confused. "We have to leave now," I said urgently. "Something's in Brittany's room." Amy looked at us like we were crazy but saw the fear in our eyes and didn't argue. So we just grabbed our things and fled the apartment, spending the rest of the night at a friend's place. The next day, we returned with a maintenance worker, explaining that there was something wrong with Brittany's closet. He checked it thoroughly but found nothing out of the ordinary. No hidden compartments, no loose panels, nothing. We felt foolish, but Brittany was adamant about not staying in that room. We rearranged our sleeping arrangements, with Brittany moving into the living room temporarily. The whispering stopped, but the sense of being watched continued. Brittany eventually moved out, unable to shake the fear. Amy and I stayed, but we always kept our doors locked at night. Years later, I heard that the apartment had been renovated. The new tenants never reported anything unusual. Sometimes, I wonder if it was all just a shared hallucination, brought on by stress and suggestion. But deep down, I low-key know that something was in that closet. Something that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it.